The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in Cambashi's 2014 webinar series on quantified or evidence-based marketing planning. I'm Tony Christian, and joining me is my colleague Peter Thorne. Before we go any further, perhaps we should start by explaining what the term marketing planning means to us at Cambashi. There are, of course, many tools and techniques to support the development of a company's high-level strategy, but there's a quotation, I think it's most often attributed to Winston Churchill, that goes something like, "No matter how brilliant your strategy, you should occasionally measure the results." Well, how well a strategy is converted into results is highly dependent on how effectively it can be translated into the many and varied targets and activities of the staff throughout the business. The set of processes that seeks to achieve this alignment, then monitor progress and tune the targets and activities accordingly, is what we consider to be marketing planning. As an analyst firm, our focus is on the $16 billion plus worldwide market for technical software applications, which is certainly at the difficult end of the marketing planning spectrum, given that it spans almost all parts of the world, covers a huge number of industries, and includes a huge number of products for a wide range of activities. Having said that, it's a market in which data-driven analysis is being used to great benefit by business planners all over the world. In this webinar series, we're going to look at a range of technical software marketing planning scenarios, and this first session focuses on a hypothetical US-based software provider that's been successful selling into high-tech industries in both the US and Japan. But the management has now said, where next? This is where I'll bring in Peter, because we're going to ask him to take on the role of the marketing executive responsible for drawing up a plan for consideration by the board of our software company. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to be using data from the Cambashi's market observatories. So first, I'll explain what these are, then I'll work through the demo scenario. So, the Cambashi market observatories, these are data sets delivered as Excel spreadsheets. Their scope is the technical application software market. Technical applications are the applications used by engineers and designers, such as CAD, CAM, CAE, PLM, also the apps used for architecture, engineering and construction, such as building information management, as well as geographic information applications and apps used by creative professionals for industrial and other design tasks. But some things are excluded. Tools used for software and semiconductor development are excluded. We handle them separately. We exclude plant floor software. Our definition of tech apps focuses on product development, including manufacturing process planning, but excluding operations management. There are 4 core data sets in the observatory lineup, analyzing providers and their products, countries, and vertical markets. The Employment Observatory provides employed headcount by industry, country, and occupation code. No software revenues in the Employment Observatory, but it's a key source for sanity checks on average selling price, calculations of market saturation, market potential, and so on. There's research material that's shared across the observatories, but each of the 4 core data sets, you can see them here in the box on the right-hand side, each one is largely driven by sources that are independent: country data, provider data, industry data, and employment data. We finalize these different views in an iterative refine, constrain, converge process. The result is a best fit to the research, so you get multiple views, independent sources, and consistency. The observatories are updated on quarterly and annual cycles, so they maybe don't hit the real-time implication of the big data label, but the scope and the granularity mean that they provide a lot of numbers. We're going to be starting with the Industry Observatory. The Industry Observatory covers 53 countries with 112 market sectors in each country. It covers 9 years in dollars, euros, and local currency. So that's around 160,000 revenue values, all money spent on tech apps. We're going to be using these numbers to choose a country. So let's look at the scenario. It's a hypothetical US-based software company which has been selling into high-tech industries in the US and Japan. It sells a software product that helps designers optimize power supplies. And this product works alongside mechanical and electrical design software from other providers. The revenues are about $10 million a year. So you can think of this as a small company where this software product is their main business, but the decision making is very similar for a big software player using add-on modules to grow business. Anyway, growth seems to have slowed. So the management team has said, where next? Their preferred growth strategy is geographic expansion. And I'm going to be the marketing person with the job to look at market size to guide this part of the plan. This power supply optimization software is just a tiny part of the tech apps market in high tech, but it works alongside the major application. It's an add-on. This means I can use the figures for the whole of tech apps in high tech as a proxy, because the opportunities for my product will have the same relative sizes and the importance of geographies will be the same. Now, before I start, I need to keep the lawyers happy with a disclaimer. The purpose of the data here is only to illustrate the scenario. The numbers are Cambashi estimates, and of course the observatories are changing and developing all the time. So, here's data from the Cambashi Industry Observatory. This is end-user expenditure on technical application software in the high-tech sector worldwide. Each bar shows one of the 18 subsectors I've chosen from the 112 I mentioned. These 18 define my high-tech sector. To create all the charts I'm going to use, I used the main data table from the observatory as the source for an Excel pivot table and drew the charts from this pivot table. Of course, you don't have to use Excel. You can export the data into any other business intelligence system. All you need is to be able to use the keys of country, year, and sector to select the slice you need from the 160,000 or so values and maybe do some growth calculations. Now, there are a couple of things I should point out. Firstly, this scenario treats domestic appliances and consumer electronics as part of high tech. This makes sense because the niche software in the scenario optimizes power supply design choices. We've got 112 sectors, so you can be reasonably accurate when you map into the sectors you want to look at. Aggregating sectors is usually important. Decision makers want to look at 10, maybe 20 sectors, not 112. In this scenario, we're looking inside this high-tech sector only, so 18 subsectors seems okay to me. In fact, discussing these sectors with colleagues can be a real way of helping everyone understand what the target market is, but that's a story for another day. Back to the scenario. The next thing I should point out is the global total for tech apps in high tech, $1.7 billion a year. I asked the sales team in our scenario company for their estimate of our value as a percentage of a customer's annual spend on engineering software. They said 5%. Of course, there would be a big error bar, but that estimate gives me the first peg in the ground for the potential worldwide market for our power supply optimization module in this specific high-tech sector. 5% of 1.7 billion, that's about $85 million a year. That's good. It means there's plenty of room for growth for the existing $10 million business. And incidentally, that 5% figure gives me something to add to the sales qualification checklist. Now, let's look where this world market is. Here are the 53 countries sorted by region. America's on the left, then APAC, then EMEA. By eye, the US is about $560 million. So that's over 30% of the world market. Next we've got Japan at 180 million, then China, Germany, and South Korea. So it looks like we're already in the two biggest markets. But market size isn't everything. We must also look at growth and the future. This view sorts the countries left to right by the forecast spend on tech apps in 5 years' time. The blue part of the bar is the starting market size. The orange part shows 5 years' worth of growth. The average annual growth is shown by the yellow diamonds, and the right-hand axis gives the scale for these compound growth percentages. I've stepped back to 2012 as the base for this 5-year growth. You can see the US blue bar is at about 540 million compared to the 560 million we saw in the more recent view that we looked at just now. So You may be interested in the highest growths. China, the Philippines and Vietnam are the top three here. But for our scenario, we're looking for an established base, preferably of products we've interfaced to in our US and Japan business. So we need to look at the countries on the left-hand side of the chart. The US is still the largest market at the end of this 5-year period, but you can see that China's world-leading growth means it will have overtaken Japan. Next, we have Germany, South Korea and Switzerland. Interesting to see Switzerland there. It's not just a land of cuckoo clocks, chocolate and cheese. In fact, seeing both Germany and Switzerland in this top 6 is definitely interesting. It's quite common to treat Germany, Austria and Switzerland as one mainly German-speaking sales region, the so-called DACH region, using the country abbreviations, D for Germany, A for Austria, CH for Switzerland, makes up DACH, the DACH mainly German-speaking sales region. So really from this chart, it does trigger the thought that Germany plus Switzerland looks quite significant, although Austria, which we'd need to make a standard DACH, is just to the right of centre. It's in the long tail of lower spending countries. It's relatively small, so I'm not going to drill down into Austria. I'm going to focus on Germany and Switzerland. So these are the top 6 countries in 2017. We're established in 2 of them. What we need to understand is something about the basis of our success. What is it about the US and Japan? And use this as a baseline, and then investigate the other countries to find the best market opportunity. So here's the US and Japan. This chart adds the US and Japan together. So as before, the blue bars show the 2012 market size, and the orange bars show the 5-year growth. And we're looking at the same 18 subsectors of high tech. The first thing that jumps out from this chart is the size and growth of this bar: irradiation, electromedical, and electrotherapeutic equipment. That's international standards language for what the rest of us call medical equipment. But credit where credit is due, the international standards people, and I should have mentioned that the observatories use the recent ISIC 4 standard. These are new definitions which have moved much closer to the 21st century than some of the old industry classifications. So this particular category separates out smart medical equipment from the more traditional syringes, thermometers, scalpels, and so on. Anyway, whatever we decide about the next country to launch into, this bar is interesting. There's a message here for the existing business. We should definitely make sure that the existing US and Japanese sales teams are trained in the language and issues of medical devices. And in contrast, here's quite an unusual feature. Here the forecast is for a decline of tech app spend by the consumer electronics manufacturing subsector. The orange growth bar is going in the wrong direction. Earlier on, we saw China's standout growth in high tech overall. So the decline here triggers the question: is part of China's growth based on winning this business from the US and Japan? So let's move on to China and have a look. The subsectors are in the same order top to bottom, so you probably notice straight away that the shape of tech app spending is different in China. We'll look at that in a moment, but first let's check the largest subsector. Here it is, consumer electronics. As you can see, it was largest in 2012, that's the blue bars, and it's largest in 2017, where you look at the orange bars. This isn't conclusive evidence, it's only one data point, but it certainly lines up with the theory that China is winning business from the US and Japan in this subsector. But whatever that situation, this subsector is evidently an important factor in China. It also looks as if the medical device marketing initiative that I mentioned won't have much impact here. So there's a faint warning flag. First of all, the shape of this distribution is different. The relative size and growth of the subsectors is different. If I flick between the two, you'll probably see this. I'll go back to the US and Japan. Here it is. The bars make a shape a bit like a bell curve, with the peak a bit below halfway down. And if I flick back to China again, almost the opposite. The peaks are near the top and the bottom here. The peak we saw in the US and Japan has turned into a valley. So as well as the cultural, language and business style factors, we'll be facing a challenge in China. We'd have to address a very different balance of subsectors. Let's move on. Germany and Switzerland. Here they are combined. This profile is at least a bit closer to the bell shape we saw for the existing business in the US and Japan. That medical device initiative should get some traction, but the largest sector is this one, automation, control and other equipment. So we'd probably need to do something new for this subsector. And here's the last of the 6 countries we needed to look at, South Korea. Different again. The big sector for tech apps is manufacture of components and boards. I'll have to check if our product truly addresses components and boards. If this is really only some sort of secondary sector for us, we might be heading for trouble. So we've been looking at 5-year growth, but we also need to look at when that growth is happening. Here's the US plus Japan again. The blue bars show the combined market size. The yellow markers with the orange line show year-on-year growth. The labels on the yellow markers are annual growth percentages. This shows a tough 2013, but growth exceeding 6% after that. Here's the same chart for China. Of course, the scale on the left-hand axis is different. This market is only about 25% of the size of the combined US and Japan. But what can you say? Fantastic opportunity. If those subsector differences don't get in the way and we can build a channel, there's growth here. How about South Korea? This market's about half that in China. The shape of growth over these years is not so different to the shape we saw for the US and Japan. Of course, we've got some questions about the subsector differences. How competitive are we in the component and board subsector? Let's move on to Germany. And, well, my first thought is ouch. It's half as big again as South Korea, and the growth over 5 years was okay, but this growth profile looks challenging to launch a business into. 2.5% in 2017 doesn't look particularly attractive. Switzerland, it's about half the size of Germany, but it's got this steadier looking growth profile with 2017 at 4.2%. So if we add them together, this is what we get. The total of about 250 million in 2017 will make Germany and Switzerland together a bigger market than Japan and about 1/3 the size of the US. It's not the most attractive growth profile I've ever seen, but it's hard to ignore.
Well, Peter, you've been looking at the industry observatory data for about 15 minutes. Maybe a good time to try and summarise what you think we've learned.
Yes, I think from my point of view, the surprise package is Switzerland. Germany plus Switzerland together will be larger than Japan within 5 years, as will China. South Korea is a major player, but the fact their high-tech sector is weighted really towards the component and board level triggers questions. I'm going to have to make sure our product is competitive in that subsector. I feel nervous about China. On one side there's fantastic growth, but the profile of China's high-tech sector is so different. We'd need to be sure we had ideas on how to go after their big high-tech subsectors.
So at this early stage, how's your thinking beginning to shape up?
Well, the decision will depend on other factors in addition to market size. So competition, channel, possibly legal and HR business issues, that sort of thing. But for now, I'm looking at just the market numbers. And top of my list at this stage is a safety first plan. It's obviously not the only option. I'm certainly not rejecting China and South Korea. But if I had to give an answer right now, after 15 minutes or so, this is it. Employ a country manager to build a DAC team, that's Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and I might even suggest that starting in the smaller Switzerland would be the right thing to do because of the rather better growth over the next few years. The DAC market is around 1/3 of the US and a bit bigger than Japan. If we assume it'll take them 3, maybe 5 years to get to the same penetration our US team has achieved, or maybe we can use our results from Japan. But either way, we've got something to go on to set some targets and some headcounts based on that and the beginning of a kind of cost and revenue pattern. The fact that a medical device initiative should work across the US, Japan, Germany and Switzerland should help control marketing costs and maybe even help the country teams feel they're all part of the same team.
Well, that sounds like a plausible conclusion from the analysis so far, but is there some way to do a bit of sanity check on it?
Oh yes, I'd absolutely want to look at the data from a different angle. In this case, the next view that I'd like to look at is the a provider view. So I think I mentioned that the software product in the scenario is designed to work alongside an established landscape of other design tools. So I'd like to check which tech apps providers are active in this high-tech sector. So what I'm doing is using Cambashi's Provider by Industry Observatory. This adds additional research into the framework of the 4 core observatories, and we get a new view of the data. Here it is. These are Cambashi's estimates of provider revenues by region, by high-level sector. There are 3 regions in the observatory, that's Americas, EMEA and APAC, and 11 high-level vertical markets in each region. We're looking at high-tech in the Americas. For this particular chart, I've selected 14 of the 28 providers that are covered, plus others. We call them ZZ others to make sure they come at the end of alphabetical sortings. My choice of 14 was based on total global size of tech apps in high-tech. So, for example, the Oracle number here isn't the whole of Oracle, it's just the part that matches our definition of tech apps, and the same is true for all of the providers. So, there are some familiar names here. Autodesk, Dassault, PTC, Siemens PLM, and others make up the top 5, with others just leading, then Autodesk and PTC. But notice that in very broad terms, others is in the same range as the other 4 leaders. Here's EMEA. Not so different, it's the same top 5, but PTC has overtaken others, and Dassault is very close. They're both relatively stronger than in the Americas. Again, others is in approximately the same range as the other 4 leaders. And here's APAC, and this is different. Others are a much bigger factor, essentially twice or even 3 times the size compared to any one of the big 4 suppliers. This could be significant. At this stage, I don't really know. The question is whether our existing interfaces and integrations will be enough, or is every sale going to require us to add a new interface? So I'm getting a similar message from a different point of view. It's confirming my concern about China and South Korea. Originally, as I said, I was worried by subsector differences. Now I think the provider picture might be rather different as well. Of course, this may not be a problem, but the numbers force me to go and talk to people who might be able to quantify this. I have to find out before China and South Korea will make it back onto my possibles list. So I'm going to stick with my hypothesis. This is exactly as before. It's what I want to pitch to the team. But I'll keep China and South Korea on the list for now. But as I say, there are questions that I've really got to answer before they truly get back on the table for consideration. And I think coming out of this, I suppose it's a side effect, but we've also unearthed some additional points. We've obtained a peg-in-the-ground estimate of the global market. We saw softening of the consumer electronics subsector in our existing countries, and we identified what people in the field probably know already, the growth of the medical device sector, but not much of that in China, and relatively muted in South Korea. That's it. I'm ready to go and talk to the team.
Well, thanks, Peter. Fascinating analysis. And so while there will, of course, be a wide range of further research and analysis involved in a project like this, just by using the data for 20 minutes or so, we've achieved not only some pretty sound quantified views of possible new markets for our software company, but also a number of important insights as to what it might take to be successful in those markets in terms of things like value proposition, and even some early thoughts on sales approach and possible product needs. So I think Peter's timing is very good there, because we've had a number of questions pop up on our chat panel during the course of his analysis. and I've got just a few minutes that we could probably use to address some of those. So if I can read these out, Peter, if I can read them properly on here. It's the first one. You talked about a set of observatories, including a country one at the beginning, and this is a scenario about countries. So why did you start with the industry observatory and not the country observatory?
Yeah, that is a good question. The reason was that in this scenario, the supplier sells into high tech. If we'd been dealing with a supplier handling a broader range of sectors, then the country observatory view would have been more useful, especially if the range of sectors we were looking at meant we needed to divide tech apps into AEC, GIS, manufacturing, and the rest. But for this scenario, the best proxy was the whole of tech apps in the high-tech sector. Now, I said proxy there, and that's important. I mean something that will have the same shape and distribution as the market for the product you're studying. Finding a good enough proxy is key to this sort of study. Obviously, you've got to be able to get the data, and that's not always easy. Then you've got to justify that your market will track the shape of the proxy. The observatories give you a lot of choices. If you go via the country observatory, you can divide tech apps into broad types of application and use that data at country level. We haven't looked at the product observatory, but if you go that way, you can select any subset of the 64 product lines from 28 providers. You get the spend on the product lines, but the geo-resolution in the product observatory is just 3 geographic regions, not 53 countries. A lot of the time you end up using the different views as a check on each other. So in this study, it would in fact be the next thing that I would do, to use the country observatory to get a feel for product design and engineering as a share of all tech apps in each of the countries we looked at. So to answer the question, I used the industry observatory first, because in this particular case, it provides a good enough proxy as well as country level and industry subsector resolution.
Okay, thanks. The next one here is actually about current economic conditions. In fact, your figures showed a great growth in China, but isn't there a lot of uncertainty in China at the moment?
Yes, yep, that's an important point. We put together growth forecasts from really quite a large range of sources. A lot of countries have statistics offices. We use material from the World Bank, OECD, IMF, United Nations. We also use proprietary sources, and they all have a view on this. From our point of view, ultimately, we're not in the economic forecasting business. What we're doing is combining a consensus view of economic growth with our models. The models handle the way tech apps sales respond to economic growth. So I agree there's uncertainty. All I can say is that if the big picture economic forecasts from the sources I mentioned are just about right, then our forecasts for tech apps will also be about right.
Okay. I think I see that we're approaching the 30-minute point. So for those that have to leave at this point, I'd like to say thanks a million for attending the session. I hope you found it a useful demonstration of the power of data-driven market analysis. And if you'd like to join us for our next session in about 6 weeks' time, you'd be most welcome, when we'll be using different data sets to look at another strategic planning scenario. But for others, I think that we've got a few more questions, so we'll allow it to overrun a little bit to pick up some of these others here. The next one, Peter, for you was you're showing provider revenues by industry. Where do you get that information?
Yes, good point. These are Cambashi estimates. They're not verified, authorized, or approved by the providers involved. But I should emphasize that we estimate, we don't just guess. We know that things add up to 100%, and that's whatever dimension we look at, country, industry, product, it must add up. This means there's a kind of Sudoku or Rubik's Cube element to integrating the research data points through the models. So for provider by industry, we look at a number of things. This would include historic industry propensity to spend, industry value add by country, provider information, and other things. Then we make an assumption, and that is that for global providers, within groups of similar countries, their sector share is not going to vary wildly. put that together with country totals that we know and provider totals that we know, and there's a way to calculate provider by industry estimates. We check any big year-on-year swings. Was there an acquisition to explain the change, that sort of thing? But to answer the question, yes, these are derived figures. There are several calculation steps between our provider by industry numbers and the sources they're based on. But that's really how it has to be until providers feel able to make this sort of information public.
Okay, thanks, Peter. The next one here says, you said market numbers are not enough for the decision. I think we alluded to that a few times. Could you elaborate on that?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, you know, we spend a lot of time with numbers, and the thing is that a good set of numbers can make it seem like the market has suddenly snapped into focus. And in a way it has. The numbers provide a real platform for decision making, but they're not the whole story. When you look at new opportunities, any sort of opportunity, geography, new product capability, you know, vertical market, you always need to look at your offer against the real demand. You want to know what decision makers really want and need, as well as how much they will buy. When you look at your product this way and how your offer stacks up against the competition, you'll probably get some ideas for product development themes and unique selling points. And you also need to think about channel to market. Today we've been looking at a new geography, and I just used the assumption of the direct sales channel, a country manager and a sales team. But for a complete analysis, you'd look at resellers, you'd look at online distribution as part of the overall market assessment. So I suppose the point is that there's quite a volume of qualitative information that can fill in the framework of the market numbers and provide a more complete picture. And you know, the truth is every planning team has to decide how to balance completeness of market picture with confidence in the plans and decisions. And you know, we all have different experiences, but I certainly see a lot of cases where it seems to be the numbers that provide the most compelling foundation for confidence.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Just one final question I've got here is all the numbers that you've shown so far have been in dollars. What about other currencies?
Oh yeah, we work in three currencies. So we have dollars, euros, and local currency. Well, actually operational currency. We try to make sure we know which currency is being used for IT transactions in a local market. And yes, all of our data is provided in all of those three currencies with using historic exchange rates for the past. We don't try to forecast exchange rate fluctuations, so we take current exchange rates for our forecasts looking into the future. But yes, you can get local currency or the operational currency, get euros, and you can get dollars. And you can use whichever one of those you need. You know, sometimes you can see an exchange rate difference that is obviously the source of, you know, can be the source of complete misunderstanding between perhaps a local country and corporate headquarters. So yes, it's an important point. We cover all three currencies.
That's great, Peter. Thank you. I think we'll let you get off to your board meeting now. I think we'll bring the session to a close there. As I said, we're happy to answer any remaining questions that anyone has by email. Please do get in touch if you have any further questions. And once again, many thanks for taking the time to attend the session. And I'll hope that you'll be able to join us next time. So depending on where you're calling from, we wish you a great day, evening or night.